Good evening to you, and I bid you welcome to the Stationers' Hall in the shadow of St Paul's Cathedral for the announcement of the presentation of the Booker McConnell Prize, a prize of £10,000 for fiction. The air here is heavy with expectation and the smell of roast lamb. This is the 14th year of this award, and as the years go by, the event generates an increasing interest, some controversy, and a certain amount of judicious leaking, and much happiness at Ladbrokes. And as with all prizes, it's a tremendous night for those who win, ask Salman and Rushdie about that, and a miserable night for those who do not win. Molly Keane, who was in the shortlist last year for this prize, said that at this particular dinner last year, everyone came up to her to say how marvellous her book was, and it wasn't until she was on her way home in the taxi, without the cash, that she realised they were just being nice to her. Well, here is gathered tonight a select band of literary lions and lionesses. They are not an often glimpsed pack. They're rather shy of lights, and they only come out at night to feed at watering holes like this. This, for instance, is the first public sighting of that benign dynastic couple, the Ferdinand and Isabella of English letters, Mr. and Mrs. Michael Holroyd. She ne drabble, many congratulations. There are others with famous faces and famous names, and some with both. Let's now, however, identify the shortlist, this year's nominees. They are, not in any order of priority, Constance, or Solitary Practices by Lawrence Durrell, 27th Kingdom by Alice Thomas Ellis, An Ice Cream War by William Boyd, Sour Sweet by Timothy Moe, Schindler's Ark by Thomas Keneally, and Silence Among the Weapons by John Arden. Now, almost or nearly all the writers are with us tonight, with the exception of John Arden, who's working in Ireland, and Lawrence Durrell, who's with us in one kind of sense because he is in our studio in Paris, awaiting with the rest of us the result. Now, the chairman of the panel of judges is Professor John Carey, sitting here on my right-hand side, and next to him is Michael Caine, who is the chairman of Booker McConnell, and he's really the host. Michael Caine is the host of tonight's ceremony. A brief word to you about Booker McConnell. Its traditional business interests were sugar, shops, and ships, and much of that trade flowed out of the port of Liverpool last century, and that's early history. And today, they are principally involved in engineering and food distribution, and recently there have been connections with the Rockefellers, I do believe, breeding chickens in Connecticut. In 1968, the firm acquired an interest in the estates of Ian Fleming and Agatha Christie, so there is a kind of tenuous book connection there. The Booker McConnell Prize now has a deal of clout, despite what my old friend indeed, Claire Tomlin, describes as a lumbering inn of television. Despite that, or even, who knows, partly because of that. It is interesting to note that in the past few years, the winner has been found from abroad. Salman Rushdie, V.S. Naipaul, Ruth Power Jabvala. The empire, as Mr. Rushdie has said, strikes back. And the empire is back again with us tonight in geographical terms because the farthest traveller here at the Stationers' Hall is from Australia. Thomas Keneally is a writer of wide reputation, author of Confederates and Gossip from the Forest, and he's no stranger to this particular ceremony. This is Thomas Keneally's fourth nomination for a Booker Prize. A lot of controversy has surrounded the shortlisting of this book called Schindler's Ark. It's classed as fiction, but it's written in a documentary style. The book is a moving account of the way in which a real German industrialist, a maverick called Oskar Schindler, saved the lives of hundreds of Polish Jews during the Second World War, and a chance way in which Thomas Keneally came across Schindler's story is extraordinary in itself.
I first heard the story of Oscar in a baggage store in Los Angeles. I was buying a bag, and the man said, what do you do for a living and where are you from? And then he said, boy, have I got a story for you. He said that he had been saved by an extraordinary Sudeten German who seemed to combine all the qualities of the good soldier's fight, Ned Kelly, Robin Hood, and that this same German had extracted his wife, the baggage store man's wife, from Auschwitz. And he gave me a great deal of documentation on the subject and started me on the story. Oscar was an extraordinary young Hitlerite dream, handsome, blonde industrialist in his 30s who went to Krakow as an agent of the Abwehr on the heels of the German army, and who began cooperating with the Jews from December 1939, the Jewish population of Krakow, and who became more and more involved in the question as the Holocaust took shape, and who worked right in the heart of the bureaucracy of the Holocaust, but in such a way as to save people. What he virtually did was set up a benign concentration camp, not once but twice, and he kept on losing his people and getting them back by bribery, by bluff, by corrupting officials, and by exploiting the extraordinary SS bureaucracy that was involved in a preposterously systematic manner in the Holocaust.
As they got closer to the gate, they became aware that Herr Schindler was standing in the midst of the SS men. They could tell at first by his memorable height and bulk. Then they could see his features under the Tyrolean hat which he'd been wearing so much lately to celebrate his return to his home mountains. A short, dark SS officer stood beside him. It was the Commandant of Brindlitz, Leopold. Oscar had already discovered, the women would discover it soon, that Leopold, unlike his middle-aged garrison, had not yet lost faith in that proposition called the final solution. Yet, though he was the respected deputy and the supposed incarnation of authority in this place, it was Oscar who stepped forward as the lines of women stopped. They stared at him, a phenomenon in the mist. Only some of them smiled. Mila Pfefferberg, like others of the girls in the column that morning, remembers that it was an instant of the most basic and devout gratitude, and quite unutterable. Years later, one woman from those lines, remembering the morning, would face a German television crew and attempt to explain it. He was our father. He was our mother. He was our only faith. He never let us down.
That was, of course, Derek Jacobi reading from Schindler's Ark, and Derek Jacobi will be giving us a taste of each of the novels as we go through them. The next book on the shortlist is by Alice Thomas Ellis. It's full of inspired lunacy about chickens and a basement area and mirth-provoking characters who insist that their names are pronounced absolutely correctly. Alice Thomas Ellis, which is not unlike a name from an Alice Thomas Ellis novel, has written a very funny book. This old piano factory is where Alice Thomas Ellis, the author of The 27th Kingdom, works. She's also called Anna Haycraft, fiction editor of Duckworth and Company. Over the years, she's launched many writers, including Beryl Bainbridge, whose next novel she's now editing.
I wish it was the first book all over again. I wish it was one.
The one that gave me goose pimples for the first time,
What?
Harriet.
Harriet? Did he give you goose pimples?
Yes, that's how I know it was right.
The 27th Kingdom is Anna's third novel. It's set in post-war Chelsea, where Aunt Irena, a large Russian lady, lives with her hedonistic nephew and a cat called Focus, and an entourage of eccentric characters. To this bohemian household is sent Valentine, a pure and black levitating nun. She has to be cured of her miraculous powers before she can return to the convent.
This is a bit difficult, Anna, because I know you don't like talking about your books.
I hate talking about them.
Well, you've got to. So that's the whole point. And really, I suppose, what I want to know, what is the 27th Kingdom about?
It's about good and evil. And it's about the church. Back in the 50s, the church was still all right. It knew where it was and what it was doing.
The Catholic Church?
The Catholic Church. So from that angle, it's purely nostalgic, because I wanted to write about a time when the church still was sort of in control. It had confidence in itself. And before, when people still believed in miracles, even, 30 years ago. And I brought in miracles because I believe in miracles. I think they do happen. And I think they're probably necessary in some way, because otherwise nothing ever gets done. And I wanted to write about Focus, the cat, because he does swim.
He's not symbolic of anything, he's just a
Yes, he's
cat.
symbolic.
Oh.
He's the storyteller. He's the old man in the corner. He's the, in a way, it's seen through Focus's eyes, because I think it's very interesting. And we think we're in control of the universe, people. But the other creatures must have a point of view. And Focus must have a point of view about us. And it'd be interesting to really know what they thought about us. I mean, spiders, what do they think about us?
It's also very funny.
And I can't help that. I mean, funny keeps coming in. I think I'm writing a terrible tragedy. And then everything suddenly seems so funny.
And it's set when?
Well, it's set in the 50s. And that's really because of the time they hanged Ruth Ellis. Because I remember that very vividly. And it was just such a mad thing to do, to hang her.
Auntie Rayner really inclined to that simplest of all views, the one expressed so cogently in the book of Genesis, which explained everything with appealing clarity. This was the only view that explained, for instance, mayonnaise. It was patently absurd to suppose that mayonnaise had come about through random chance, that anyone could ever have been silly or brilliant enough to predict what would happen if he slowly trickled oil onto egg yolks and then gone ahead and tried it. An angel must have divulged that recipe and then explained what to do with the leftover whites. Meringues. There was another instance of the exercise of superhuman intelligence. To Auntie Rayner, the Ten Commandments seemed almost insignificant compared with the astonishing miracle of what you could do with an egg. As the angel had left in his fiery chariot, he must have added, and don't forget omelettes, and cake and custard, and soufflés, and poaching and frying, and boiling and baking. Oh, and they're frightfully good with anchovies. And you can use the shells to clarify soup. And don't forget to dig them in round the roots of your roses. The angelic tones fading into the ethereal distance. It was obvious, therefore, that the egg came first. There must have been 3 eggs, thought Auntie Rayner, going into details, 1 to eat then and there, and 2 to hatch, a boy and a girl. It was quite possible to hatch an egg in a human armpit. It had been proved on various American campuses, and went with swallowing live goldfish and putting ferrets in your trousers. Why are you looking like that? Asked Kirill. I was wondering why people put ferrets in their trousers, said Auntie Rayner. Thanatos, said Kirill, an illustration of the death wish. What I wish, said Auntie Rayner, is that you'd never read Freud. It's had a very leaden effect on your conversation.
This is the chairman of the judging panel, of the Booker McConnell judging panel, Professor John Carey. John Carey, what reasons can you offer for there actually being more interest now in the Booker McConnell Prize than there was sort of 6, even 5 years ago?
I suppose because good novels have been chosen, not only for the winning novels, but also for the shortlist. And so the public has found some place where it can be sure of a good read. of something that's worth its attention. I think that the kind of publicity that's supplied by television and so on helps as well, but fundamentally I think it's a tribute to the choice of the books and choice of the judges.
A choice of the judges? Who chooses the judges?
Well, the judges are chosen by Booker McConnell with the advice of literary experts.
What powers do you have as chairman?
I found disappointingly few, really.
Or what powers would you like to have as chairman?
You're allowed to cast a casting vote in the case of complete disagreement between your 4 other judges. And of course you can organise how the discussions go. But really I think that the objectivity of the whole discussion was what impressed me. The chairman doesn't really carry more weight than anyone else, and shouldn't.
Is there any lobbying?
Not as far as I was concerned. That would rather disappointed me. I hoped that there would be a procession of young and beautiful novelists coming to my door, but that didn't happen. No, I'm afraid no one got at me. I think maybe others have other experience.
You're being too modest about that, I think. You were allowed, though, I think, as chairman, to invite any member of the panel to present to you or to the panel themselves a novel not presented by a publisher.
Oh yes, that's right. As a matter of fact, any member of the panel has a right to call in a novel, and that was done.
Well, thank you kindly. And you have somewhere in your pocket, because you've had a seminar tonight, haven't you, about 6 o'clock?
A long and exhaustive one, yes.
A high-powered seminar, and you've got the result in your pocket. For the meantime, thank you very much indeed. That's John Carey. Now, Lawrence Durrell, who is on the short list, is not here with us tonight in London, but he has travelled to Paris to be on a kind of satellite link. The novel he's written is called Constance. It's one part of a thing called a quincunx, which sounds remarkably like a Latin incantation. There are those who've read this third part of that 5-part book who say that however clever, they think they've seen it and they've heard it and maybe they've read it all before. Well, earlier we spoke to Lawrence Durrell in our Paris studio.
Mr. Durrell, I know it's very difficult to sum up such a complex work as Constance, but can you try it for us?
Yes, at the risk of being inaccurate, it's about love. It's about a love affair. But it's studied, the postures of love, the models of love, is studied across 20 or 30 years. In other words, what's happened to the couple since 1938, since before the war. And so in a sense, it's a gallery of portraits of people in love, in various postures. It's an investigation, really.
This is a quincunx, you call it, which means 4 pieces in the corner and 1 in the middle. Is that the middle?
Yes, it is the pivotal one, really. It should excuse and explain the apparent muddle of the earlier ones, because it isn't really a muddle, it's getting clearer and clearer. It's like a solution which is clearing, and I hope by the next one it'll be quite definitively in a shape. But a shape which will not be a linear shape like an ordinary novel which goes A, B, C, D through a historic time, but you'll read it like a painting. In other words, all the bits will be assembled in your head, and you can return to it for pleasure, like you return to a memory of a good Van Gogh that you last saw at Arles.
In the books, writers invent writers and novels invent novels. Will we finally have Lawrence Durrell appearing?
Oh, I don't think so, no. No, I don't know him enough, you know. I really am, I'm in the dark about him. Unless he lives to 120, it's unlikely.
She, for it was a woman, walked with a deathly pale composure inside a square of guards who looked vaguely like beadles, though they carried the short trident of the Camargue cowboys as part of their fancy dress. They guarded her preciously, though she did not seem to need guarding. She walked quietly, with apparent composure and lowered head, but her pallor betrayed her mortal fear. Her skin glowed almost nacreous in the warm rose of the flambeau. Her hands were tied behind her back. "There! There!" cried the crones as the little group advanced. "There she is at last!" It was clear that they spoke of the evil one herself. The woman, as she approached, overheard the tumult and slowly raised her head. Her wonderful head of blonde hair rippled upon her shoulders. Her blue eyes were wide and cold. Her nervousness gave her the air of almost smiling. It was as if she had stage fright. She hung back in the wings, so to speak, for she had never acted this part before. Up! Up! Up with you! Cried the crowd, indicating the rostrum upon which at last they mounted her, attaching her wrists to a column of wood. A pandemonium of rage broke out. The women with the scissors scuttled up onto the dais, and waving to the crowd, histrionically made as if to chop off her tresses, pulling them to full length so that they gleamed like the fruit of the silkworm's agony. "Justice!" shouted the madman down below, and the crowd echoed him. "Vengeance! Justice! Prostitute! Traitor!" The scissors began their work, and the blonde tresses were shorn and thrown into the crowd as one throws meat to a pack of dogs. They were torn to bits.
This is not actually a formal part of the programme, but I thought I ought to tell you that when it was suggested that I should present this particular programme, there was some positive raising of eyebrows until I pointed out that there was a kind of historical connection between me and the Booker McConnell organisation. Because in 1968, the first winner of the Booker McConnell Prize was a man called Howard Newby, P.H. Newby, who is with us tonight here. And he was then, in those days, my boss on the third programme. I was producing a programme called The Arts This Week for Radio 3. And Booker McConnell, in those days, you know, announced the winner privately about a week beforehand, so you could get everything geared to having the right man in the right place at the right time. I then had to go to people way, way, way above Howard Newby in strange offices and say, is it possible to have my boss broadcast on my programme a week next Thursday? And they suspected there was a great deal of hanky-panky going on. There was not, and I take this opportunity of congratulating him for all those many years ago being the first prize winner. Congratulations, Howard Newby. I'm less afraid of you now than I used to be. Now, the next novel is Sour Sweet, written by Timothy Moe. The Sunday Times described it as the most unusual novel on the shortlist, written with a sly, dry humour and 1,000 tiny, brilliant touches. Timothy Moe is signing copies of his book and giving a lunchtime talk about his writing. His first novel, The Monkey King, was set in his native Hong Kong and won for him the Geoffrey Faber Award in 1978. Sour Sweet, which is his second book, is the story of a Hong Kong family who set up a takeaway restaurant in London and become the prey of the violent and bloodthirsty Chinese underworld.
Yes, sir. Good luck. I'm Jim's editor, and I think this is probably one of the really happy occasions in an editor's life, which is that they've taken on somebody's first book, before anyone knew him, and with his second book, he becomes a runner-up for the Booker Prize. Please God, may he be the winner of it, but this in itself is good enough.
The language is used in the way in which it's used in a certain kind of English novel. It's not what's loosely called a Commonwealth novel. I don't write, for instance, like someone like R.K. Narayan or Ruth Proa-Jabvala, where the language is very transparent, and it's the events. I try and use the language very much in the sense in which any English novelist writing about English scenes and English people would use them. And I think of myself as very much someone who's not, a Chinese novelist who writes about Chinese people and the justification is its content. I'm really a novelist who happens to write about Chinese people, and the novel stands up on its own feet. The turkey was up and lurching from side to side. Lily, angry and excited, missed with her first blow, and the second caught the turkey on the neck and bounced off. The bird dropped on one leg. Some people do tend to be rather shocked by the violence in the book. I don't think I've got a particularly sick mind. I think they have to be there. I don't think I've gloated over them. They're just there, I'm afraid. I mean, I've ruffled a few feathers with my books, I'm afraid. The first one more than this one, touch wood. I think I can do more justice to what ability I've got by writing about the same sort of characters that, I don't know, Angus Wilson or Anthony Powell's going to write about. I'll write that kind of novel next and we'll see what happens and take it from there. Really, it was quite an audacious book for me to write because it's made up of the most appalling elements. If you I mean, if I had to sit down now and write a blurb about it, you would not want to read it. There's no question about that. I guarantee you would not want to read it. It's, you know, it sounds like the worst kind of thriller, you know, which it isn't, of course.
Lily, angry and excited, missed with her first blow, and the second caught the turkey on the windpipe and bounced off. The bird dropped on one leg, but was immediately up. Lily rubbed the chopper blade briskly against the kitchen windowsill, melting the frost on her makeshift whetstone. The turkey was now against the wall, and Lily measured her blow, levering her entire body weight from the waist and channeling it into her long arm. The turkey's head flew off, and a surprisingly small amount of blood came from the neck. The headless bird began running in small circles, which widened. Lily watched in amazement. There was no killing this bird. Its great feet scratched the ground. She gave a short snort of laughter at its ludicrous appearance. The back door opened, and Man Key emerged. The decapitated bird was now running in a big circle, and it went straight for Man Key, who had stepped into its orbit. The bird showed no sign of flagging. Man Key screamed and ran for his father, with the turkey apparently in pursuit. Looking over his shoulder, Man Key saw the turkey's path would take it to his father before he could reach him, and he turned to Mui instead. Lily was laughing helplessly at the comic sight. How alarmed Son looked over nothing. As Mui gathered Man Key into the sanctuary of her arms, Lily stepped into the bird's path and tripped it neatly. It fell on its back, legs and claws still stubbornly pedalling. Chopper dripping, Lily went over to Mui. Man Key was crying and would not look at his mother. Mui took him indoors, while Lily brought the twitching turkey into the kitchen.
It's almost, you know, chicken or turkey lib night tonight, because almost everything has a chicken or a turkey in it. I'm at the moment not talking about chickens or turkeys, but with Salman Rushdie, whose reign, I suppose, as King Booker ends tonight, doesn't it, in about 5 minutes' time? Has it been a jolly and exciting and hectic year for you?
It's been, I mean, it has been very pleasant. I must say that I'm extremely relieved it's all going to happen to somebody else in a few minutes.
Why?
Well, I think there's only, you know, one can only be in this world for so long.
There are benefits to being Miss World, however, peripheral they may be. Well, you were invited, I gather, to Downing Street immediately after the last year's...
Well, that was probably the juiciest thing that happened. I had a very strange phone call from a very posh female voice, which revealed itself to be speaking from the office of the Prime Minister, and said that this was at the beginning of the Festival of India when Mrs. Gandhi was coming over. And said that Mrs. Thatcher was having a lunch at Downing Street in honour of Mrs. Gandhi and wished that me to come. And I thought it was a hoax. And I said, "Is this a hoax?" The voice got very cross. It's a perfectly genuine invitation. And so I said that it just seemed very peculiar that of all people they should ask to a lunch in Mrs. Gandhi's honour somebody who'd just written a book that was extremely rude about it. And the voice at the other end of the phone displayed symptoms of terminal panic and said, "Oh, gosh." She said, "Oh, well, you see, it was the Foreign Office that recommended you." And you think they'd have read your book, wouldn't you? So then she said, could she call me back about it? And in the meanwhile, I decided not to go, and so when I told her that I wouldn't go, she was very relieved. But the punchline of the story is that after I did not go, the day after this lunch at which I wasn't present, there was another dinner at which I was also not present, at which Mrs. Gandhi and Mrs. Thatcher were being honoured by an organisation called the Indo-British Association, at which Mrs. Thatcher made a speech about the Indo-British connection, and she talked about things like curry and ethnic garments and so forth, and then raising the tone, talked about literature. And said, of course, we've just had an example of the value of the Indo-British connection. And then, while Mrs. Gandhi sat there, hatchet-faced, talked about Midnight's Children for a little bit. And then said, and of course, this book was written by the young man you met at lunch yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you kindly, Salman Rushdie, with me. You are here tonight, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Of course. Now to John Arden. This is in every way John Arden's book, a big, rambling novel, openly admitted by Lorna Sage, who's one of tonight's judges, as being the top of her personal list. She admits, however, under mild pressure, that this may be, quote, a private device, unquote. Now, if John Arden wins tonight, his prize will be collected by his son, Adam Arden. John Arden established himself in the early 60s as one of our major writers, with the plays Sergeant Musgrave's Dance and Armstrong's Last Good Night. Arden's desire to retain artistic control over his plays and his strong political views have often put a distance between him and the established commercial theatre. Arden now lives in Ireland. Silence Among the Weapons is his first novel.
It just happened at the beginning of last year that I wasn't doing any theatre work at the time or radio work or anything else, and my wife had already written a book about her experiences in Armagh prison. Now, she had written this to a publisher's commission very quickly, and she'd never thought she could write a consistent, great narrative of prose either, being a playwright. And having had to do it, she went and did it, and I felt, well, if somebody else can do it as easily as that, I can. I'd always been very deterred by the whole concept of a great chunk of narrative. A play is much shorter and is worked on in a very slow way. You know, one does a little scene of dialogue at a time and then leaves it alone and then comes back to another one. And at least that's the way I write plays. But with a novel, it's a question of having to write so many words a day, otherwise you simply physically don't get the pages filled. And I took courage from the fact there was somebody else in the same house doing the same thing, and actually sat down and began. It's about the theatre in the 1st century BC, which is the time when the Romans were taking over the Greek world. Now, the Greek theatre was had shifted a lot from the days of the famous Greek dramatists, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Aristophanes. It was no longer a religious exercise, it had become a professional theatre. And yet it was based on Greek culture. And then you have the Romans with their own ideas on the question coming in and taking over these theatres. And around this time, you actually get a shift in theatre architecture, which suggests that something different was happening to the people that worked in the place, that the artistic concepts were changing. And I thought this is something that could be explored.
What basically is the storyline of the book?
The storyline is that there is a man who is an agent for actors in Ephesus, which is a Greek city. And he gets involved in the political situation when he discovers that the Romans want to take over the Ephesus theatre and use it for gladiatorial games. And the theatre artists get together and decide they've got to do something to prevent this. As a result, he through a whole complication of intrigues, he finds himself working for the Roman Secret Service. And then he gets over to Italy and finds that he's in the middle of a civil war that the Romans are having there with their Italian subject people in the south of Italy. And the story slots into a very vicious set of wars that the Romans were having among themselves and with other people at that time. It takes place, I suppose, about the time when Julius Caesar was a schoolboy.
The man had folded his hood back when the rain left off. He had a huge maroon birthmark running all down one side of his face, from eye to jowl, as though someone had splashed paint at him. His hair was thick, tufted, going grey at the temples. He seemed mild-mannered, sensitive, perhaps a little diffident. Then I saw his eyes, ice blue and utterly terrifying. They never changed, whatever expression moved elsewhere on his face. I am so sorry if I am intruding, madam, but I understood from the artistic director it would be possible for me to be here if I did not get in the way. Roscius, lifting his mask, took a squint at what was happening. That's quite in good order. The gentleman is permitted. Chloe snorted, turned away to her work. I sat up in alarm and adjusted my attire. That birthmark? Roscius's permission? Of course! And they called him the Stain. Was there a specific penalty for insulting an incognito senior officer? I thought it more than probable. My father would have known. My father would have been oiling the man's buttocks by now. Oh, God. The bloody Stain was coming across to talk to me. What on earth was I to say?
This is what you might call the commercial end of the hall, because here with me is Ron Pollard from Ladbrokes, the betting organisation. Who approached whom? Did they come to you or did you go to them?
Booker McConnell approached me about 3 years ago to ask if I would do the odds on the Booker McConnell prize, and I was pleased to do it.
It was worth your while, or has been worth your while?
It's been good fun, yes.
What happens, for instance, if a judge very late in the day puts a disguise on and goes into your shop and asks to place a bet?
I just wouldn't know. We've got, 1,260 outlets. I wouldn't know who he was.
They could go anywhere.
Right.
Would you know Lorna Sage if you fell over?
No, I wouldn't.
Right, well, I'll show you on your way out. You've got the closing prices with you now. For
Here
tonight.
we are, yes. The, an ice cream.
Shall you hold those up so that we can all see them there?
Marvellous.
There is, towards the camera, are the Ladbrokes closing prices for tonight's Booker McConnell prize, which will be announced in one moment or two. Heading the list, William Boyd at 6-4. He's the favourite, you say?
That's right.
Thomas Keneally 9-4. Third, Timothy Moe and Lawrence Durrell both at 6-1. And in what do you call it, fifth place, John Arden and Alice Thomas Ellis at 10-1. Do you have money on this?
I don't personally have money, but we have an investment, because if an ice cream war were to win, we would lose. But if the others win, we will win.
Well, as it so happens, by a strange stroke of fate, William Boyd, who's the favourite on Ladbrokes' list, is the last of this year's list of our nominations tonight. Some critics of this greatly enjoyable read have hung the word old-fashioned, or the words old-fashioned around it, rather grudgingly, I think, but then being a critic himself, albeit a television critic, he will not presumably be too concerned with the judgments of others, except, of course, for tonight. William Boyd is 30 years old. He was brought up in West Africa during the Biafran War and then sent to Gordonstoun. Now he teaches English literature at Oxford. He's published 2 previous books, a novel called A Good Man in Africa and a book of short stories called At the Yankee Station. In this, An Ice Cream War, he indulges in a mixture of comedy and bewildering brutality.
Very briefly, it's about a war, the First World War, and more precisely about a campaign of the First World War that took place in East Africa between the British and the German colonies out there. There was an extraordinary forgotten corner of the First World War. Most of our attention's been concentrated on Flanders and the Western Front, but the war went on for a full 4 years and longer in East Africa. It was a moving war. It wasn't confined to trenches, and it was full of the most extraordinary, bizarre incidents. I came across a reference to the war in East Africa quite by chance, just reading a newspaper one day, and I realized I hadn't the faintest idea about what went on there. So I set about gathering information and was surprised to find that the bibliography of the war in East Africa is really quite small. I would say in books written in English doesn't amount to more than perhaps 70 or 80 books altogether. So it's an underwritten about corner of the First World War anyway. I was always aware that my stance would be anti-war, to put it bluntly. Therefore, I aligned myself fairly consciously with the books in that tradition. Fiction makers who provide us with our images of war, whether in words or whether in pictures, should perhaps be a little bit more circumspect about the attitudes they put across, because very few of us these days ever have the experience of battle or going to war, and our experience of it is entirely vicarious, and that experience is provided by filmmakers, TV makers, and novel writers.
He ran on regardless. It was all he could do. Then he felt the first bayonet slice into his leg, a slashing, tearing stroke that severed the big rectus femoris muscle in the middle of his thigh. He crashed to the ground, squirming and rolling over and over to avoid the pronging, skewering blades. They missed once or twice, but they eventually got him. He saw the bayonet coming as he spun round, watched it spear through his tunic, felt an icy coldness, which wasn't really painful, travel the length of his coiled intestines. He saw the blade withdraw with a squirt of his own dark blood, looked up in horrified disbelief as another man stepped into place for his turn, felt his mouth fill with hot, salty water. He wriggled desperately in an attempt to get out of the way, saw the second blade slice in just above his hip bone, glancing inward off the pelvis, feeling the rasp and judder of the point on the bone. He thought he heard faint cries of, "Halt!" And that was all.
Now the moment to announce the winner of the 1982 Booker Prize, Booker McConnell Prize for Fiction. I'd ask John Carey, Professor John Carey, to come here and make the announcement, and also Michael Caine to present the prize of £10,000 and a leather-bound copy of the winning novel. And here, first of all, is John Carey to make the announcement. Applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honour to announce the winner of the 1982 Booker McConnell Prize, and the winner is Thomas Keneally for his novel Schindler's Ark.
Money.
Thank you.
Many congratulations.
Thank you indeed.
Congratulations from us too, and from John Carey.
Yes.
Do you have anything to say to us at this precise moment?
Well, I had nothing prepared. I was prepared to water down and console the people from the Hodder and Stoughton stable and get them back home safely. Naturally, this is the greatest night of a lonely career. I can but console the others who are here because they are conspicuously young. All day I should warn the judges, I've been asked, is it really a novel? And I've said that I'm delighted that I don't have to answer that question. The judges are going to have to answer it tomorrow. I'm astounded that they had the courage to put themselves in such a position. I wish them well with the task. Second last of all, I, as a man who believes that gambling is as important as literature, I hope Mr. and Mrs. Pollard and their children survived this blow to Mr. Pollard's career. And the other remarkable thing is that although I think in all good conscience the book is a literary work and a novel, it is necessary to thank the people, the characters who are actually alive. And one of the characters is a luggage merchant from Los Angeles, whom I mentioned earlier in the recorded interview, Poldek Pfefferberg or Paul Page. Not only could I recommend his merchandise, but he was the man who gave me the story, and I'm in the extraordinary position of that's akin to that of a Hollywood producer when he humbly accepts his Oscar and thanks so many people. Normally a writer doesn't have to thank so many people, but most of my characters are still alive, and I'd also like to remember the extraordinary character whom Oscar was.
It's a case of the Empire. The Empire strikes back again, and don't forget, fourth time lucky. Our thanks to Derek Jacobi for reading the extracts. The celebrations are now going to continue with coffee and conversation, and book show will continue tonight. After the impertinent intrusion of Kenny Everett, we go to the Savoy Hotel and thence to Southern Ireland to meet Molly Keane. And as a bonus cherry on tonight's cake, a special book show at 11:30 with a programme on tonight's winner. And even as I speak, people are scurrying up and down corridors at Television Centre looking in cupboards for a recent documentary about Thomas Keneally. That will be shown at 11:30 tonight. Meanwhile, from the Stationers' Hall and everybody here, good night and thank you. Bye-bye.